Hi, my name's Steve Usher and welcome to the Experienced Designers podcast. The year 2020. Probably the year of the greatest stress test for employer brands. The difference between what organisations do and importantly how they do it has never been more important during these COVID challenging times. And we've all read the stories, these kind of brutal cuts with little care for people versus difficult decisions handled with humility. Good or bad, some of you will have experienced it firsthand. For those furloughed, for those chosen to continue working, for those made redundant. Regardless of the situation, how companies have acted during COVID will show the true colours of their employer brand. Was it fact or fiction? One thing is for sure, people will not forget. And for me, this moment in time will shape future perceptions and will make or break an organisation's ability to secure top talent in the future. Perhaps a common question on future candidates' lips. How did you support your people during COVID? What did you do? More importantly, how did you do it? So for me, who better to explore the topic of employer brand than with Bryan Adams, CEO and founder of PH Creative, a global employer brand agency based in the UK and US, as we talk about the journey of employer branding, both past, definitely present, and the future. And finally, amazingly, this all coincided with the release of his latest book, titled Give and Get. I'd say the title couldn't be any more perfect and relevant for 2020. Don't you agree? So as always, thank you so much for listening and enjoy the show. Bryan, welcome to the Experienced Designers.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Very welcome. Very welcome. So, Bryan, just for the audience, just a little bit about yourself and your background, a little bit more about PH Creative as well.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Bryan Adams, the CEO and founder of PH Creative. We've been going, I think it's getting on for 16 years now. So we started out as a digital marketing agency for the first 5 years, but then quickly specialized in the recruitment space, really honed in on employer brand probably the last 6 to 7 years, really. So I'm a reformed marketer. Big passion of mine is storytelling and branding, so it's everything I love in one space, so we've got a great creative team. We'll focus on strategy, and I think ever since we've specialized, we've gone from strength to strength, and been fortunate enough to work with some phenomenal people and clients.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched your journey. I mean, I know Dave Hazelhurst, and so no, I'm very familiar with PH and the journey you guys have been on. I've always been very envious and very respectful of what you guys have been doing. So it's very very good stuff. And just tell me a little bit about what was that trigger, Bryan, in terms of when you kind of started delving or kind of specializing into the employer brand. What were you seeing at that moment in time? That kind of that you saw the opportunity and you pivoted towards that.
Yeah, so it was more dumb luck than any sort of strategic genius or decision, really. We had a couple of clients in the recruitment space, and we started to build up momentum without noticing, really. But when we looked at it, we started to find opportunities to make real big strides. So we saw the HR industry and the recruitment space as being sort of a few years behind marketing. So, remember in the days when we used to say recruiters need to think like marketers. So, we jumped in and we felt like we had a lot of value to add, and we kind of didn't agree with some of the conventions and traditional approaches. So we thought we could disrupt, make a difference. And I guess just from a practical perspective, overnight we went from having 6,000,001 competitors in digital marketing to a handful of employer brand agencies that we would then compete against. So we felt it was a place where we could make our mark.
Yeah, nice. Very good. Very good. So okay, so you'll be really well positioned then because what I want to do for the audience today, I want to do a bit of a journey, if that's all right. So I kind of want to kind of just delve a little bit into probably those last 7 years, actually, just to give us a bit of a sense of, from your perspective, like a high level overview around how has employer branding evolved perhaps in the last 7 to 10 years, aligning to your own journey, of course. How would you describe that kind of historical journey? And I won't get into COVID impact just yet, but just let's get back up kind of 7 to 10 years. How would you describe that kind of evolution of the employer brand?
So I think right in the beginning, it was very much internally focused and process driven. And, I think the industry woke up to the fact that it needed to be audience focused and experience led rather than internal processes, which that sort of piqued our interest. And as I say, it started out with a premise of recruiters need to think more like marketers and start marketing the idea of organizations as employers, and start to describe and articulate the employee experience a little bit differently. And I think, as talent, as it became more competitive to attract talent, that really sort of changed the focus of organizations. And, like anything else, that meant you had to think differently and try new things. And with the introduction of social media and digital marketing, I think, worlds collided, and that was the start of something. And I think only probably in the last 5 years, we started to realize that we were doing it slightly differently to everybody else. Just from what we could see, applying our sort of creative brains from different worlds, we started to sort of galvanize a framework that we believed in, and we started to get success. So, we've started to forge our own path, but we're fortunate enough to have then seen the employer brand landscape start to mature and it become a thing. And we've been sort of participants in the community ever since, really.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly there's been it's like the employee experience right now. I think it's going to go on a fairly similar trajectory in terms of it being a discipline and evolving. But like employer branding, now we have kind of global head of employer brands, we have whole teams and whole functions now that drive the strategy and obviously the application of it internally within companies. What have you seen? Have been kind of those last 4 years, say, kind of leading up to now? Do you think it had really matured, like at an absolute level, or just still think pre-COVID, you still think we had a lot still to go from an industry point of view in terms of organisations, even developing their EVPs, adopting employer brand? Because it seems like the big players were doing it really well, or some of them. But I don't know, I still got this sense that perhaps it still wasn't really, we weren't quite at that kind of top end of that kind of that maturity curve.
Yeah, we're definitely nowhere near the top of any maturity curve. And I think up until a couple of years ago, maybe even now, like some people are still debating, what is employer brand? So just defining and agreeing as a community and as an industry what it is. There still seems to be a lack of certainty and clarity around that. You don't see people in marketing departments pontificating over what is brand. I still think there's a long way to go. I also think organizations are still unsure of where to put employer branding inside an organization and who owns it. And an interesting thing, probably just in the last couple of years, and I'll sort of project into the future now, a bit of a prediction is, I think employer brand is starting to rise up the hierarchy and sort of seniority of organizations, such that rather than it be owned by recruitment, talent attraction, internal comms, it is definitely sort of starting to sort of forge its own path, even to the point where I can see a world where employer brand owns talent attraction, employee engagement, and talent experience across the board. And I personally believe that's the rightful place for it. And, we're certainly seeing C-suite opinion and just awareness change such that employer brand is now, one of the biggest priorities in a lot of leadership organizations, a lot of organizations' leadership. So there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, yeah. Just out of interest, what's the disparity between the opinions about what employer brand actually is? What's the different kind of
Yeah,
what's the different
good question.
descriptions that are coming out?
I've seen some weird and wonderful descriptions. Even just like, well, people don't want to call it employer branding, they call it talent brand, and this, that, and the other. So we can't even agree on a title, never mind the definition. But I think there's still a lot of confusion. People perceive it as recruitment marketing and that thing that you do to attract people towards an organization. Whereas we very much see employer brand as something that resides inside an organization. It's basically the perception and reality of the employee experience and how people articulate what it's like to be inside a company. And every organization has an employer brand, whether it's by design or not is a different matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether they like it or not, it's there. So look, let's talk about the current situation, or this 2020. Actually, let's not focus too much on a virus, but undoubtedly it's had an impact on every walk of life for sure. But my question to you, Bryan, is what the hell just happened from an employer brand point of view? Because I've got this thing.
Brand point of view, wow.
Yeah. What on earth happened? What's some of the things that you've seen from this situation?
So interesting times, to say the least. But when you look at the downturn in 2008, and people are even comparing it to the Great Depression, 1920s, we've just seen the world come to a halt with such severity in 12 weeks that actually played out over 12 months in 2008. So, we've seen a timeline compress, and what that's done is put organizations under great pressure, and there's been great disruption across the board in a very short space of time. So, not surprisingly, there's been panic stations across the board for many, many different reasons. Some organizations have suddenly had to shrink down and they've had to let hundreds, if not thousands, of people go. Some organizations have had to scale up dramatically, like with just a few minutes notice, it felt like. So turbulent times, has forced organizations to tactically have to react. And I think what's happened, in the wake of the initial sort of tsunami of change and disruption, is organizations are now starting to question, like, how could we have handled this better? What have we learned? What's the strategic way of being able to manage our reputation, our ability to hire, our ability to engage and retain people? And of course, the conversation is now quite rightly starting to turn to employer brand and how to drive organizations forward and deal with all of those things in a little bit more of an organized way. So it's been very interesting, to say the least.
It has, isn't it? I mean, I saw some early examples. This is before the government announcement in the UK with obviously furlough support, etc. And there was some organizations who, there was an estate agency firm actually, who they kind of pulled the trigger really quickly, and the stories that were kind of emanating out from some of the staff in terms of just how badly it was managed and how brutal actually it was, how unhuman in many instances. My immediate reaction was like, boy, are you going to struggle when because we've been around long enough, Bryan, we can see the cycles. When this comes back, you're gonna struggle. I think right now people are not going to forget how they're being made to feel, whether that's good or bad through this situation, how those organizations have handled this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the legacy of how organizations have treated their people will stay around for a very long time. I think the COVID bubble of, how did you treat your people during that period? And I've said this a lot lately, but it's true. They say true character is revealed under pressure. And what we're seeing is what organizations are really made of, what they believe in, and, and how they value their people. And the sorry state of affairs is, the assumption is there's a tension between doing what's right financially for an organization and doing what's right for the well-being of your people. And I say that, I don't say that lightly, but the unfortunate thing is if you overlap those things, the financial well-being and of an organization and the well-being of people, if you overlap them and see where there is an overlap, that is the opportunity to galvanize an internal employer brand, galvanize the culture, show leadership, and for the organizations getting it right. We're finding, even though everybody's working alone in isolation, people have never felt more together, so the sense of belonging has got better.
Yeah.
When organizations have shown leadership and communicated with great certainty and clarity, then the opportunity to feel that sense of impact that you can make as an employee to the contribution of the well-being of your organization has never been better. And also feeling that sense of purpose that what you're doing matters and it's the right thing. So, leadership and communication is essential now to communicate current reality and also demonstrate where the organization's going and needs to get to as the future reality. And this isn't the time to switch your people off and have them feeling disenfranchised. This is where you need your people to pull together, especially if there's only 50% of you left or worse in some cases. And there's never been a more socially acceptable time to be vulnerable right now as organizations. There's a lot of opportunity there to show empathy and compassion and make big expectations and demands of your people. And in the face of adversity, people are capable of wonderful things, So it's not necessarily the circumstance, it's how you communicate and how you demonstrate the mindset and compassion for your people right now that's going to make or break organizations. And I think there's going to be some very big lessons learned after this. There's going to be some case studies that are dissected for many years to come.
Oh, yes.
And, organizations are either going to be on the right side or the wrong side of this.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting.
It is. I have to say, one of the ones that stood out for me, I know it's been well documented in recent weeks, is was the Airbnb example, and that quite frankly, that beautifully crafted communication, which was very, very transparent, very open, very supportive. Really spoke to the people. That was just a lesson in my mind. It was a master lesson of dealing with this obviously tragic and very challenging situation, but in a way that's very humble and very, but also commercial as well. At the end of the day, they are a business and they have to make those very difficult decisions, but I think they did it in the right way.
Well, it's a very good example because clearly they're vulnerable financially right now, and that's very obvious to the world. But how they've just treated their people have been talking about, and they will remember, and it's probably altered the sentiment of their brand in a very positive way, significantly. And I was chatting about Airbnb the other day to a few people, and two people have said to me independently, do you know what? I never thought about booking Airbnb in the past, but as a result of that, I've recently booked an Airbnb. And it just shows you the power of employer brand knows no boundaries between influencing somebody as a candidate or employee or a consumer. And what we're seeing now is employer brand stories in the media. People don't know it's an employer brand story, but it's changing public perception from a consumer perspective as well. So it's very powerful. And I would say the same for Microsoft, how they've offered 12 weeks additional parental leave for their employees purely because they understand the situation of dealing with a household as well as getting your work done when working from home. And it's the greatest marketing campaign an organization could possibly have right now, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. That's why I just scratch my head sometimes, because this is absolutely one of the greatest opportunities. I know it's a bad situation, but if you play this right in a really, really good, positive way, it could really, pay dividends in the future. Even if you look at it just purely from a financial, reputational point of view, obviously the biggest element is the human aspect. But if you just got that bit right, boy, could really take advantage of that and certainly escalate your own brand in a competitive marketplace once things start to kind of come back. So yeah, it's interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It sure is. It sure is, and it shows the power of employer brand for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I said it as soon as this happened. I was like, "This is the biggest stress test right now. This is in the moment right now the biggest stress test for employer brand." So I think it's and one thing I would say is I think we're in for a bit of a renaissance. I think it's going to really, if we thought there was kind of some interesting kind of events and evolution of employer brand in the last 5-10 years, I think the next 5 is going to be super interesting. Which brings me really nicely on to this interesting talk about timing here, Bryan. So, so there was this interesting kind of the universe was obviously listening to you at some level. So there was interesting convergence of this, hugely impactful period, and the release of a book that you co-authored with Charlotte Marshall.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because I agree with you. I think this is the year of employer brand. I think this is the stake in the ground, but it's probably going to take 12 months. A lot of people sort of looking back with hindsight, for all of that story to play out. And we wrote the book, and we planned the launch. It was March 17th, and I think the world stopped on March 15th. And we ended up delaying the launch of the book. Basically, the worst time ever to launch a book. But do you know what? With everything that was happening, we were philosophical about it, and it was like, nobody cares. Nobody cares. Nobody's. It just paled into significance in terms of priority. But it was interesting, though. Possibly the worst time ever to launch a book, but there you go. We got it out there, and it's done pretty well, and it continues to do so. I feel pretty lucky, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. So, just out of interest, what was the? I know you've written a book before. Was it Getting Goosebumps? I think I remember it was one of those.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And what prompted you to write this one? Just give me a sense of what was. Yeah.
So essentially all it is I mentioned earlier before, our approach to employer brand is different to the conventional traditional approach, which essentially it's a lift and shift from the world of marketing and branding. So that's the typical approach to employer branding, probably out of naivety more than anything else. We have a completely different approach, and our framework and philosophy is different, and we call it the give and get of employer brand, which essentially, rather than employer brand being there like a magnet to attract talent, we see it more as a smart filter to be used to actually deter more people, to repel more people than it compels towards your brand. So faced with a few options to try and sort of get our message out, and a sort of burning ambition that we believe this was the right way to tackle employer brand versus what was out there, we had a few choices really, and we opted for the idea of writing it down and sort of giving it away to the world, because we believe this is the way the industry should approach employer brand, and hopefully we can achieve that. Because by taking people through our give and get employer branding framework, we've made massive differences to huge multi-billion-dollar organizations, as well as mid-sized startups and so on and so forth. And it sounds counterintuitive, the approach that we take, but I'm yet to talk to a head of employer brand or talent attraction or anyone who's read the book. Like, everybody tends to agree. It's like, oh my God, of course, that makes so much sense. We wanted to put it out there and explain how to do it,
Yeah. So let's talk about this, because I love the it's one of those things. So I thank you for the copy, by the way. And I haven't finished it all yet in time for this podcast, but I obviously got through a fair chunk. The thing about it is actually really simple, but yet I can imagine so many organizations, because it's when you're in a room probably designing the employer brand and the whole attraction, the magnet, we need more talent. And I think in the since the 2008 financial crisis, and we've been in this period of everyone's looking for the top talent, and everyone's looking for it. So this kind of top of the funnel has just been stuff as many as you can in at the top. Let's just get as many in, and then we'll select for the few. But what's really interesting is I think that, in my mind, has driven the dissatisfaction in candidate experience, because
I agree.
You're just getting too many people coming, knocking on the door, and you're not repelling enough. And so I just thought it was a really, really brilliant opening when you kind of explained it, because I was like, that's absolutely amazing. So just gives us a sense of like the construct of the idea and the whole give and get piece philosophy.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, to be honest, you've started to articulate it really well there, possibly better than me. But employee brand has sort of traditionally existed to attract more talent to organizations. And the consequence of that is recruiters are overwhelmed. It's difficult to offer a positive candidate experience at scale. And when it boils down to it, Steve, you're just wasting a lot of people's time. So what is seen as an indicator of success, volume, and attractiveness of a brand, before application, is seen as an absolute nightmare afterwards. Next to having children and getting married, it's probably one of the biggest decisions in life as well, isn't it? So, I think organizations owe it to candidates to lay out the facts of the demands and expectations of the employee experience. So they have the opportunity to self-select out and find an organization that they love, where they can find belonging, impact, and purpose, because they're better culturally matched. So the concept really is, rather than a magnet, it's more of a smart filter. And being bold and brave enough to be upfront with the harsh realities of the employee experience, what it really takes to thrive, because that's what candidates want to know. And it's also what employees want to be acknowledged and appreciated for as well. So it's a two-way value exchange of, here's the strengths, benefits, and opportunities on offer, but these are the demands and expectations that we have as an employer. And are you prepared to give us that in order to get what we're offering?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really, and I could only imagine being maybe some kind of workshop and saying, right, so we've talked about how we're going to attract. How are we now going to design the repel part? How are we going to create that? And I'm sure there's not many that have actually thought about that very kind of implicitly. Like, how do we repel people just as much as we attract? I mean, that's quite just asking people to think, how would you repel people from your business then, or from applying to your business? I'm absolutely certain not many have kind of thought of it from that angle.
No, but it's funny because it's always a good icebreaker in workshops, or when I talk on stage about this. I'll say, if it was your job to dissuade somebody from joining your organization and you couldn't lie, what would you say? What's the number one reason not to join an organization? And once people warm up to the idea, you can't shut them up. They're like, oh my God, well, there's this, and this, and this is. And then when you speak to recruiters, if they're in the room as well, it's like, well, how liberating would it be to have that laid out there? And people don't apply for roles despite those things. They apply because of them, because what one person sees as an uphill struggle that they're not willing to take on, somebody else sees as a really worthwhile challenge where they can find some sense of achievement and pride, and an opportunity to progress. That's the mindset, and that's the type of person that you want in that seat. And if you could fill an organization filled with that type of person that embraces the employee experience for exactly what it is, for all the realities, including the harsh realities, then the workforce would be better for it. So that's the idea.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so some of the bits for me was, or one of the questions that I had here was around, how do you do that on scale? So how do you kind of build that scalability for this kind of filtering system? Because I saw in the book you had an example around the kind of the old EVP model and then the give and get EVP model. And when I looked at that, I just thought it was brilliant, because it just felt, for me, it was like a progressive model beyond the traditional EVP model. It just looked and felt that way, definitely. But when I was also looking at it, the give and get under each EVP pillar that you have, and perhaps you can give a simple explanation for the audience, is just how, like, practically how that works. Because I looked at it, I thought, yes, but I had some questions around how does that really work practically in a big organization or a medium organization?
Yeah. So the first thing is, this isn't just be upfront with negatives and be open about weakness. That's not what this is about. And the employer brand, can still be very much positive and aspirational, and can get people's attention and should be designed to create an affinity. But if you imagine a marketing funnel, the big difference here is the middle bit. Instead of the job of that bit of the funnel trying to qualify people and carry on that journey, this is the bit where it's okay for people to say, this isn't for me. So the employer brand can attract somebody to your organization, but when they lean in and they have questions, the two-way value exchange, clearly, explicitly setting out, if you want all of the upside, you have to be willing to invest this. These are the values and behaviors that we hold dear to us, and that it takes to thrive inside our organization. These are some of the environmental harsh realities that you need to be comfortable with in order to progress or find happiness inside our organization. That's the bit where it's completely different to a marketing funnel, where your job is not to lose anybody through the funnel and get everybody to convert. This is the bit where actually the smart filter takes place. And the funny thing is, Steve, is this isn't just unbeknown to candidates, and it's a refreshing way to sort of get what you want from your audience without them knowing. Candidates are just people, and we're not daft. We know when we're being sold to, and if you just give somebody the sunshine truth, why is Glassdoor worth $1 billion? Could it be that they're not finding the whole truth that they're looking for on your career site? Could it be they're skeptical, or could it be that they have questions unanswered? But the danger of relying on Glassdoor to get some sense of balance is usually it's schizophrenic. Either you love the company or you hate the company. I don't know anyone who's ever been to Glassdoor and left a 3 star rating.
There's definite bias swings. Yeah, for sure.
So you may as well own the full conversation and be upfront, even with the vulnerabilities, because what a great way to demonstrate, if you join our organization, you can make an immediate impact if you're open about the fact that we're not where we need to be, or we've got some work to do in this area. Even diversity, some organizations with the worst diversity figures don't make much progress because they're in a state of paralysis, because they feel like they can't be vulnerable enough to reveal where they're at and where they want to get to. There's a huge gap. Whereas if you then market to a diverse audience, and let's just say ethnic minority, for example, the internet's littered with data showing that ethnic minorities who join an organization who didn't realize just how bad the diversity numbers were, the attrition rate is far higher, and it's a massive signal that, hang on, this isn't what I was sold, this isn't what I was expecting. So that's another great waste of time in terms of setting expectations ahead of. But if you say, look, this is the aspiration, you talk about inclusivity of the culture, and your call to arms is for people to join to help you improve the numbers, and you're upfront, like, it's not going to be easy. You're not going to find a rich, culturally diverse organization, but with your help we will, and our appetite to improve is such that you're going to make a big impact. Now, that's a much more honest proposition to put on the table, and people are going to have their expectations met when they join and be more compelled to contribute to help you get where you need to be. Doesn't that just make sense?
It does. I mean, just that, the ethnic minority here, I mean, if you're just open to say, look, we recognize our numbers, aren't where they want to be. We have an aspiration to be, but we want you as part of that first group to help us accelerate, diversity in our business. And we want those kind of characters who can really bring that to life in our organization. So, because it's not difficult. I think goes back though, but I think what's interesting, you've used this interesting word, which is a number of times, and I really, because I'm a massive fan of Bryan Brown. And I think you had a quote from Bryan actually in the book, which was centered around vulnerability. I think what makes you vulnerable makes you beautiful, actually, was the quote you used.
Mhm.
What's the how do we bring that to life in an organization? How can organizations use this this vulnerability to their benefit, in also perhaps connecting it into some of one of your passions, which is around storytelling? What can businesses
Yeah.
do to kind of learn from that?
So I guess the first thing, Steve, is vulnerabilities, weaknesses, and gaps in organizations, with an elevated sort of sense of reality of transparency. Now, people can easily find out where the gaps are in organizations. I think people are comforted when it's discussed by an organization. So there's an opportunity to lead the narrative, not just have it talked about elsewhere. So I think with transparency, vulnerability is inevitable to be revealed online. But from a story structure perspective, without adversity, without friction, without challenge, there is no story. And to make human connections, and essentially that's what employer brand is there to provide. You need to have that element of vulnerability or challenge. Otherwise there's nothing to talk about. And so it's an essential part of story structure.
Yeah.
But it gives you an opportunity to create a scenario where people can imagine how they can find a sense of purpose, a sense of contribution, and make impact in an organization as well. So there's so many benefits. It feels like you've got to be brave, but actually it's just a smart thing to do in this day and age.
Agree. I think there is a lot of organizations that need to be braver with this. We go back to the kind of the give and get philosophy. Is it's kind of saying, let's not KPI out kind of the numbers here, because it's always the numbers kind of drive the behavior in certain kind of talent acquisition teams. It's like, number of applications per job, or these types of kind of metrics that are widely used. It's actually like, how about we just get less candidates coming through our door, fewer? And I think some organizations would really struggle with that. Just that in its own sense.
Yeah, I mean, the key there is if your percentage of valued applicants goes up, it doesn't necessarily need to impact the volume of qualified candidates. It just needs to reduce the amount of noise it takes to find them. So, I mean, I would worry if we built an employer brand and we designed an EVP such that volume went down across the board such that nobody was applying for a role. We've probably got the balance wrong there. But the point is the percentage of valued applicants coming in, should go up, and that allows, like you said earlier, recruiters and hiring managers to spend more time with people that are better culturally matched. Candidate experience can benefit from that as a result, and everybody wins.
Yeah, absolutely. Just got one more question, because I haven't got to it on the book yet, but I saw it was later in one of the chapters, because one of the big things is always business cases, measurement, return on investment. I mean, ultimately that pays for the initiative and the focus. So what advice would you give to people out there, Bryan, who's kind of looking to kind of either raise budget or to reevaluate budget, etc.? Is there any kind of good practice that you've seen organizations or approaches to this element?
Yeah. So luckily, we were talking about maturity earlier, weren't we? I mean, there's a number of publicly accessible case studies online now that link employer brand organizations that have invested in employer brands with a direct correlation with their stock price. And I think there's 15 indicators on Bloomberg that are employer brand related. So business cases are getting much stronger as time goes on. But if you look at any priority on the CEO's desk, very quickly, you probably find the derivative of a people issue underneath. If there's anything around performance or, culture or anything really, usually it's a derivative of the people inside your organization. I don't think many people would argue with the fact that people are the only true competitive advantage left in business, so it makes sense to have the best people inside your organization if you want to succeed or dominate. But getting a little bit more sort of practical, if you look at all of the metrics, the traditional metrics of talent attraction and talent engagement, cost, time to hire, attrition levels, retention, all of those things can be directly impacted and affected with a better employer brand. And when you look at the cost per vacant seat inside an organization, which is quite easy to calculate, and that calculation's in the book, it can be astonishing just how much money it's costing a business to not have the right people in the right seats on a daily basis. So yeah, the business case argument gets stronger and stronger by the day.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's we've done a little bit of kind of history here and now. So what's let's put our Mystic Meg hats on. What's some of the kind of future state, kind of what's kind of important right now going forward, do you think? What's some of the kind of key topics or areas that you think people should be thinking about or considering?
Yeah, so it's an interesting time, isn't it? Certainly sort of coming off the back of COVID, we were still kind of in it, but people are already starting to look at, sort of, we're calling it the next normal. What does that look like? And I think now our chairman said something the other day which made me laugh, which was, it's okay to swim naked until the tide goes out. We're finding out right now who's been swimming naked. So I think that renaissance you were talking about is certainly set up nicely. I think organizations are going to be looking at their employer brand, how that translates into a more honest, authentic, and valuable value exchange. So the sort of EVP sort of side of things. I think organizations are looking at, okay, how do we prepare to scale back up? How do we tell our COVID story? I think one of the biggest interview questions the next 6 to 9 months was, how did you handle the employee experience during COVID, and what's changed as a result? When you talk about vulnerability, I think a big win for organizations would be vulnerable enough to say, this is what we learned about ourselves, this is what we noticed we had to improve on, or these are the opportunities to improve that we've embraced. So I think we'll see that as a narrative, and it's something organizations would be crazy not to embrace. And then going forward, a little bit more sort of tactically, I think it's been very difficult for organizations to scale down and let people go. It's going to be incredibly difficult to start to scale back up, especially with the legacy of, of brand reputation, of how you've treated people. And I think we'll start to see a seismic shift of great talent join those organizations with great reputation, and of course leaving those other organizations, even if they're financially more secure right now, if they have got a poor reputation, they're gonna suffer for many years to come with a lesser caliber of talent who have seen their priorities shift in recent months. People are more interested in well-being and flexibility and compassion, and working for organizations with integrity that can offer them the security of doing right by them when things get tough.
Yeah, definitely. And I did see I've spoken to quite a few people who it was just one of those things where you hear it enough times, you go, wow, that's actually a bit of a trend. It was just basically people saying, do you know what, I was actually had one eye on the market before this happened, but now I'm absolutely staying where I am. I've got absolutely no intention of going anywhere, because the way in which they handled and the way they supported them through this process. And I think that in itself just speaks volumes for sure.
Well, yeah, and I think there's a danger of making some assumptions, as we come out of this. And I think if you're faced with scaling back up and hiring people, I think assuming that the people you've got are going to stay could potentially be a big mistake, especially if you haven't got the greatest reputation. And I think there is potentially a gulf coming where organizations, even if they've been vulnerable or there's obvious weakness the way they've had to scale down, like Airbnb, when they open the floodgates to hire people again, there'll be no shortage of applicants, because they've made an impression on the world now, haven't they?
They have. I think one of the things most companies are going to need to get really quickly is the give and get filter in my mind, because as you say, once you start, well, there you go. But no, I mean, just thinking about that whole filter, it's like, wow, and they're going to have to move pretty quick on their EVP. They're going to have to really move. I think those that move quick now on reevaluating that before then the market picks up and they start bringing in, new talent into the organization. I think that's going to be an interesting one. Those that pivot it quick enough to then create the new filter that then takes them forward. So yeah, no, really interesting. So so look, Bryan, any kind of we've got a giveaway as well, I think we have, or a free copy, or win a free copy of the Give and Get book, which I'll have a link in all of the bio and the website and everywhere. So I'll put it out on social media and LinkedIn as well. And also there's a Give and Get site as well if people are interested in buying the book, and obviously connecting as always, Bryan, with yourself on LinkedIn, and you've got Twitter as well. Pretty active on Twitter, I saw.
Yeah, a little bit. Bryan with a Y _PHC is my Twitter handle. LinkedIn's probably the best place to get a hold of me, and it's giveandget.net. But yeah, happy to give away a couple of books. And what I was thinking is I'd be really interested for people to share what they think their give and get proposition is, or if people can give a really good example of a harsh reality that they're actually proud to be able to cope with and thrive within. I think if we can get some examples there, we can definitely give away some books for the best examples.
Awesome. And that would be for people to share that would be in the on the website, or the type form that we've created for this session. Perfect. Well, Bryan, thank you so much for your time, buddy, and so great to see you that you're back in the UK now. And stay safe and healthy. And again, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Cheers, Steve. Been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks a lot.
And there you have it, another episode of the Experienced Designers podcast. Thank you so much to my guest, Bryan Adams of PH Creative. And if you want to get in touch with Bryan directly, please do so. Links are on the website, and also there's a link there for the Give and Get website as well. And finally, of course, for a chance to win a copy of the Give and Get book, there is a link also where you can register your name, and we'll be picking a lucky winner by the end of October. So look, thank you as always for listening, and see you next time. And until then, bye for now.